Morning, stand on garters. We can call you that. This is David Krayden, broadcasting live to you, to Canada, to the United States from the nation's capital. What is that nation anymore? That's a question we're going to examine this morning when we come back in mere moments.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please subscribe. Please resubscribe if you've been unsubscribed. We're almost hitting 60,000. No big deal for a lot of folks, but it's a big deal here because it's been a long time coming. We have battled suppression on a daily basis. Thanks for your support the last couple of days, especially as we've examined, I think, two of the most important issues of the year. And that's, of course, the incredible censorship that's going on with the Tamara Leach, Chris Barber trial and the outrage about telling freedom fighters that they should go to jail. No accident, folks. No accident at all that this backdrop occurs while we have this incredible story going on with Sean Feucht. Now, if I'm pronouncing that, I've heard three pronunciations for this U.S. evangelist Christian musician. So it's either Feucht or Feucht, but I'm going to go with Feucht because that's what I've heard most often. But this man is another hero, and he's come to Canada to expose this country for what it's become: a hollowed out authoritarian state ruled by tin pot dictators in little cities like Montreal, like Toronto. Why do I call them little cities? You say, well, these are megalopolis. These are metropolitan centers. They're ruled by small-minded individuals who want to take your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion away. That's why I call them small cities, because they're ruled by small-minded people. I want to have a look here, like we did yesterday, at Sean's X site, because it's absolutely fascinating what's going on here. Let's have a look. And of course, Sean was able to perform in Toronto last night. And but here's the incredible thing from that service last night. And this you have to remember. This man is being treated almost like a pseudo-terrorist. He's being treated as some political extremist. So what does he do when he goes to these churches? He performs Christian music. People raise their hands worshiping Jesus Christ, and they have communion. And yet they need police presence in the back of the church. And I love this. Unbelievably sad that this is the state of the church in Canada. Sean posted just an hour ago. Toronto police stand in the back of the church while Sean Feucht does communion with the crowd. This comes after the Christian pastor faced violence in Montreal just days ago. Do you think the police were there to protect Sean, or were they there to intimidate the Christians? And here we are. Here's what they were doing. No politics, dancing, singing, and joy about protesters come to faith. You might have your views change and be saved. That's from the July 27th show last night in Toronto. I've got some video to show you that. Here's the National Post. Sean Feucht is a much bigger name in Canada today than had governments just let his concerts happen. And thank God he's a bigger. And my colleague from the Post, Millennial Beth Beisch, recorded this last night. More singing and dancing along to Sean Feucht at a packed church in Toronto following efforts to cancel him. Yeah, Toronto tried to. Derek Sloan, I hope Donald Trump brings down the hammer on this. This is an absolutely juvenile and capricious ban by a bunch of anti-Christian, holier than thou bigots. A country can't tolerate different opinions. A country that can't tolerate different opinions is a country that will never innovate and grow. And we'll get to this other post later. So he's coming. He went to the States, back to the U.S. I love this one here. He went back to the U.S. and literally kissed the ground because it was like being in a dictatorship and escaping. It was like being in a slave state called Canada, and he went back to the land of the home and the brave. The home of the of the free and the brave. And he says, back in the U.S. Never done this before, but I'm doing it now. You know, there's been times when I have gone to the U.S. and I felt the same way. I felt like, holy, at least I have freedom of speech here. So, we're just the response, and here's the baptism last night. We got some more video to show you that. But isn't that subversive? They had a baptism service. Yeah, and there were some pro-Palestinian extremists involved in the attempt to shut down the concert in Montreal. And the police were on their side, of course. Yeah, of course they were. Wow. Anyway, we got a lot more to show you here. So I better get back to the broadcast. But here's the crowd last night. Just phenomenal. Look at these people trying to get in last night. And that's what happens when you push back on basic human rights. People say, forget it. I'm going to claim my human rights, my freedom of speech, and my freedom of religion. So that is absolutely fascinating.
It's a real lifesaver.
And that, of course, thanks to the post-millennial and Beth Beisch. Great work, Beth. You always do fantastic work on the road, documenting the encroachment of authoritarianism in Canada on people like you and I. I wonder sometimes, are they going to show up at my door? Take me away. I don't know. But this is wonderful to see. And here, of course, we'll get to this later. Why am I showing the House of Commons debate with Mr. Prime Minister John George Diefenbaker, Canadian Bill of Rights? Because the Canadian Bill of Rights, which of course was usurped by the Charter of Rights, speaks more eloquently about freedom than the latter bill or the latter charter. And we're going to get, the preamble to the Canadian Bill of Rights speaks directly to what's been happening in this country all week. The National Post reports, where did this all start? Well, of course, the Liberals. The Liberals were at the root of this. Halifax Liberal MP Shannon, I don't even know, Maya Dima. I have the utmost respect for the value of free speech. BS. My addition. But I do not believe that this event aligns with Parks Canada's core values of respect for people, equity, diversity, and inclusion or integrity. What BS is that? Who is in charge of Parks Canada? Oh, yeah. Yes, we think we know who that would be. I think we know who that is, actually. Where is he? He's usually right on the side here because this is a man who has no respect. Anyway, it's Stephen Guilbeault. I thought I had a video on the side of him saying he's a proud socialist. Stephen Guilbeault is the man in charge of Parks Canada. And here's PEI Liberal MP Sean Casey. What a bunch of gutless excuses for parliamentarians. While I fully respect the right to freedom of expression, BS, you do not. My addition. I do not believe this event reflects the values of inclusive. Okay, say it. Inclusivity and respect that define the city of Charlottetown or the government of Canada. And the comment from the National Post, to respect free speech rights, you first have to understand them. These two clearly do not. No bloody kidding. Here's Chris Barber, my friend Chris Barber, who is on the verge of fighting to retain his truck, Big Red, from the Ontario Doug Ford government, who wants to confiscate it for his work, for his heroic work in the defense of Canadian freedom and saving the lives of thousands of people. Canada needs help, Chris Barber writes. No kidding. I couldn't agree more, Chris. It needs help because in the same week it persecuted Sean Feucht for coming to Canada and trying to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. It threatened you with 8 years in prison and the confiscation, the expropriation, the communist expropriation of your truck. That's what happened last week in Canada. That's what Canada has come to. So, and he's responding to Sean's post that says, I've been in touch with senior White House officials, and they are watching what is unfolding with blatant Christian persecution in Canada. We're keeping all receipts, too. Now, that's a warning to Canadians. Do you think Donald Trump is watching all of this and saying, well, business as usual in Canada? No, he's probably saying, holy... I don't want to say it. Holy crap! Has Canada gotten this bad? Where an American evangelist can't go to Canada without being harassed, attacked, physically attacked. His bus was hit by a car. There was a smoke bomb let off at his Montreal concert. Is that what Canada has become? I'm sorry, but it has. Here, here's some. This is what the Canadian municipal government is so worried about. Like, this is the sort of extremist activity that goes on at these concerts. Wow, look at that. That really looks dangerous. Yeah. And you couldn't even drown in that pool. But they consider baptisms and communion to be dangerous. Let's hear from Sean here.
Here outside of Montreal, and we were just hit by a crazy car. It was out of control. It was swerving everywhere. I don't know if it was intentional. I don't know what, but it rammed into our bus, and we were all sleeping and felt it just bam our bus. And so we pulled over. We got police coming. The car, I think everyone's safe. Everyone's okay. But man, this is wild. I don't remember the last time I've experienced warfare like this, and I would just ask for you guys to please pray. Can you pray for us? Can you pray for our team? Can you pray for our bus? Can you pray for our truck? And police are here. They speak French. We speak English, so that's going to be fun, but we'll figure it out, and I'll come back to you guys soon. We're right outside of Montreal, but please be praying. We know that, gosh, the enemy hates worship is going up across Canada.
Yeah, the enemy meaning
I'm a liberal and a proud socialist, Mr. Speaker.
There we are. That's Stephen Guilbeault. That's the guy in charge of Parks Canada. Who do you think the order's been coming from? Yeah, the proud socialist, the environmental extremist. That's where the order's been coming from. So Sean had his bus attacked by some idiot. So it's not just the government. There's enough crazy Canadians out there who think Christians should be killed. Clearly. What are these people doing here, they're wondering? We don't have freedom of religion in Canada. And that's, of course, what this country was all about in the beginning. But it's no longer about that. I'm sorry to say. It's no longer about that. Let's have a look at this. Here's somebody from the
We did not plan to be here tonight. You know, a man plans his ways. We got our ways very well planned. In case you don't know, I've been coming to Canada for 20 years, leading worship all over this country. This is not a new country to me. This is a place that I've been for many years. And we had a great plan. Really awesome plan to bring worship to all the significant cities across Canada, starting in Halifax and ending in Vancouver. And God had other plans. And the enemy tried to stop him. And it's his old playbook that he's used for thousands of years. He used it with Moses. He used it with Daniel. And all throughout history, we as the church, we've kept worshiping. We've never stopped.
Yeah, amen to that. I want to read to you a couple of lines from a column I just wrote this morning for Human Events. This is not up on the Human Events website yet. It will be later today. I encourage you to have a look at it at www.humanevents.com. It'll also be posted on my X site at davidkrayden.com. And I really, really put a lot of thought and emotion into this column because I tell you, I am seriously worried about where this country is going. And I won't read the whole column, I'll just read selected portions because I think this possibly, and we're going to get to, after I do this, I've got one more video to show you, plus a video of Pierre, a vintage Pierre video, when he was speaking about this very issue. Where is he today? Okay, maybe there's a legitimate reason for him not to be talking about this. For him not to be saying this is outrageous that Christians are being persecuted in this country, that a Montreal church had to pay a $2,500 fine because it didn't have a permit to host an evangelist. When did that start? Well, let me read a few lines here. The ordeal that several Canadian cities have imposed on U.S. pastor and Christian musician Sean Feucht is emblematic of just how sick, woke, and embarrassing Canada has become. Want to have a pride parade with men exposing their private parts to children? Hey, that's okay. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's what inclusion means to these Liberal MPs, right? That's okay. That sort of thing is just okay. How about a Christian music concert with crowds raising their hands, worshiping Jesus Christ? Sorry, but not in the backyards of Quebec City, Moncton, Charlottetown, or Gatineau, a city just across the Quebec border from Ottawa. Sean continued to evade the long arm of Canadian authoritarianism Sunday night by performing at a Toronto church. But the efforts of the tin pot dictators in Canadian cities represent what is perhaps the most visceral demonstration of the persecution of Christians in Canadian history. This is a satanic response to a Christian who dares to oppose the LGBTQ agenda, abortion, and critical race theory. Yeah, he's pro-life. Doesn't support same-sex marriage. Oh my God. You can't have an opinion like that in this country. I told you about the Montreal church, but this is incredible. The COVID mandates and lockdowns conditioned churches to accept the invasion of their places of worship by police in flak jackets. Although the Premier of Quebec has talked about banning public prayer in response to pro-Hamas rallies on Montreal streets, this is just more government overreach in response to the failure of Montreal police to discourage or block these protests. And this outrage last week occurred against the backdrop of Freedom Convoy organizers Chris Barber and Tamara Leach being threatened with up to 8 years in jail for engaging in a peaceful protest against COVID mandates. Why is there such pushback against an American evangelical performing before church crowds? The mainstream media in Canada continues to refer to Feucht as MAGA affiliated and as a supporter of Donald Trump. We can't have that. What is it the Canadian politicians don't understand about Trump being legally and overwhelmingly elected as the chief executive of the United States by supporters who wanted to make America great again? What's your problem, Liberal MPs? Is this going to affect how Donald Trump deals with Canada over tariffs? You bet it will. You bet it will. And this is a national sickness. On Saturday, Sean had to change his venue from a federal park in Gatineau, controlled, of course, by Stephen Guilbeault, after the National Capital Commission denied him a permit to perform. Wonder where that order came from. He had to go to some small towns in Ottawa Valley. Even in Kelowna and Abbotsford, BC, inside Canada's Bible Belt, Canada's mainstream media is finding opposition to Feucht preaching and performing in public. A nation, what should really enrage us is that this all illustrates what Canada has become. A nation where Christians are third-class citizens instead of the people who founded the country in 1867. We should be sick of hearing about how divisive or controversial views should relegate Christians to the back of the bus. Because who defines what these terms mean? Who defines what these mean? Is a Liberal Party rally not divisive and controversial? Is a gay pride parade not just divisive and controversial, but also obscene in a celebration of hedonism and a cyberitic lifestyle? Of course they are. But we have come to the place in Canada where Christians are not permitted to worship in public places and need the approval of their local Soviet council to do so in their churches. Canadian politicians are so detached from reality, so deluded and so woke that they consider anyone reflecting the views of Donald Trump or the Bible as unwelcome in this country. Even though Trump is the elected head of state of the country that Canada is most allied with, most economically tied to, and most militarily connected to. I say again, this is madness, and this is not the country that I was born in and grew up in. It's like a foreign nation that actively persecutes Christians. Sean himself has said that he has not faced the hostility and the obstacles that he has overcome in Canada while touring in Middle Eastern countries that are apparently more tolerant towards Christians than Canada. Now, Sean posted last night on X, God is not dead in Canada. No, I agree. The secularists, the woke crowd, the enemies of freedom cannot kill God or destroy Christianity. That's never going to happen. But the question really is whether Canada is dead as a democratic nation that not only tolerates freedom, just tolerates freedom, barely tolerates freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but also embraces it, nourishes it, and proclaims it from the rooftops. That's the Canada I remember. I just want to, before we get to Pierre, I want to show you this.
Who did that? Who did that? Who did that? Who did that? Who did that?
I don't know who did it. He just missed it though.
Oh God.
So there's a smoke bomb being hurled at the Montreal event, which of course was like hell on earth getting into. And that's what Canada's become now. So it's okay for these other people to throw smoke bombs. And the police, of course, went barricaded, basically prevented people from getting into the church until they finally thought, well, maybe the optics aren't very good here. You know, we remember what happened when we threw Christians out of churches during the COVID pandemic, and when we arrested pastors and threw them in the jail. The optics weren't too good for the cops, were they? So the police sort of backed away, but were still there as an intimidating force. That's what the police have become. You know, I was always somebody who loved the police because I'm ex-military. I worked with police, military police, and the other, and police, RCMP, OPP over the years. I've worked with them all. And I thought, you know, they're really on our side, the side of the normal people. And I remember reading about the 1968 Democratic Convention riots, where the yippies and the hippies and the far left and the new left basically rioted in the streets over the selection of Hubert Humphrey as the presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. And Mayor Richard Daley, the Chicago mayor at that time, he had been mayor for a long time. He sicked the police on these demonstrators, and they literally bashed in heads with cudgels. And I remember thinking about that. Well, you know, maybe sometimes you have to get rough with demonstrators or protesters. But you know what? When it turns on its head and you become the people the police are using the batons on, the cudgels on, then you have to remember, no, excessive force is never justified. The police are not there to impose their woke agenda on the churches or to impose the government's woke agenda, because the health services who controlled the pandemic were unlawful. They had no right to do and say the things they did. Now, I've got a great clip here. This is vintage Pierre Poilievre, and he talks about exactly what's been happening in Canada. And this is from March 2022. This is right after the Freedom Convoy was crushed by Justin Trudeau and the Emergencies Act. This is just after the Freedom Convoy was completely assaulted by Chrystia Freeland and her freezing of bank accounts. This is the way Pierre Poilievre used to talk. Where is he today on this issue?
Joining me in Saskatoon, let me introduce you to two of my best friends. We've got here Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier, and we've got here Prime Minister Diefenbaker. This is the site of one of the most folkloric stories in Saskatchewan history. In 1910, so the story goes, the great Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier came to Saskatoon to give a speech. And when he was out in the morning, he bumped into a newspaper boy who sold him a copy of the Phoenix. They had a wonderful conversation, according to the story that Diefenbaker would later tell. And after their conversation was done, the young Diefenbaker said, "I'm sorry, Prime Minister, but I have no more time to talk. I have more newspapers to sell." Now, we don't know if this story is true. Some historians contest it. I can tell you I wasn't there, so I can't confirm it one way or the other. But here's what I can say. A lot of people would say these two men would have nothing in common. We have a liberal and a conservative, a Quebecer and a Westerner. But wait, both of them shared a passionate love for freedom. That's why Laurier was so popular in Western Canada. He opened the doors to immigration so that waves and waves of people could come here and settle the land and carve a little piece of paradise for themselves out of that big, cold patch of land we call the prairies. And my ancestors actually came to this country around that time. He also opened Canada up to more free trade, free enterprise. He believed in freedom of expression, and he believed in the dignity of the individual to make his or her own decisions for themselves. Here we have our friend Diefenbaker, who brought the Bill of Rights for Canada to protect our rights to speak freely, to believe what we want, to be free from discrimination and undue mistreatment by government. So they both shared that great Canadian tradition of liberty. In fact, when Laurier, who was a great supporter of immigration, was asked, what is Canada's nationality? He didn't know how to answer it. based on ethnicity because there were so many ethnicities. We had, of course, French and English. We had the First Peoples. We had Germans, Irish, Scottish, and so many more. So he answered very cleverly and accurately. He said, Canada is free and freedom is its nationality. Similarly, Diefenbaker, when he gave us the Bill of Rights, said, I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern my country. It is this heritage of freedom that I pledge to uphold for myself and all of humankind. Those are the words that we should all celebrate as we give Canadians back control of their lives and make Canada the freest place on planet Earth.
Let me read that again for you, because as I write in my human events column, this is the Canada I was born into. The Canadian Bill of Rights came out in 1962 while John George Diefenbaker was Prime Minister of Canada. Now, Diefenbaker had his flaws, personal and political, but I can tell you this. He understood what freedom meant. He understood what freedom of speech meant, and he would have gone to his grave defending anybody. He would have gone to his death defending freedom of speech and freedom of religion in Canada. These are concepts misunderstood or completely not understood by politicians like Mark Carney and these liberal MPs who say, oh, freedom of speech has to be contingent upon diversity, equity, and inclusion, has to be contingent upon critical race theory, or it's not free. These people are morons. These people are beyond reason. Let me read that again. I'm a free Canadian. I'm a Canadian, a free Canadian. Free to speak without fear, free to worship God my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind. Sadly, as I write in my column, I can only see that Canada in my rear view mirror. When I come back, some closing remarks about the state, the abysmal state of Canadian democracy. Now, I don't want to go on because I think it should be apparent. Canada dying as a democracy. We don't have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. That's what last week demonstrated. It's possibly over for this country. But the deadheads who run this country are too stupid to realize that their anti-Christian, shall we call it Christophobia, is on display for the world to see. Everybody's watching Canada right now and saying, what happened to this country? Because it's no longer the country that Diefenbaker talked about, where we had a heritage of freedom. We don't have a heritage of freedom anymore. We don't have a semblance of freedom anymore. This country has descended and is descending into hell. And that's what the last week illustrate for us. The threat to incarcerate two peaceful protesters for 7 and 8 years in jail, and the constant persecution of a Christian evangelist who just wants to share the gospel of Christ with Canadians. And that's no longer allowed in this country. We have gone way beyond the pale. And this is why I'm concerned about the future of this country for all of us, and why we can't ignore what's been happening over the last week. We have to continue to fight, resolve to resist. These are not just platitudes. These are not just rhetorical statements. This is where our minds and our heart has to be. And if you like that comment from John George Diefenbaker, we've got t-shirts and hoodies with the preamble to the Canadian Bill of Rights printed on it. It's been one of our most popular items since we introduced it over a year ago. I encourage you to go to the store today and buy one. Show your appreciation of what Canada used to be and possibly can be again. And I encourage you. We've only got 4 Conservative MPs, including Garnet Jenius, who are fighting against this. Now, I don't know if they're renegades. We should have the entire Conservative caucus up in arms about this. And Poilievre needs to talk out about this too. He finally spoke up last week about the Freedom Convoy injustice, the incredibly ridiculous demands by the Crown to incarcerate Chris Barber for 8 years and confiscate his truck, and to incarcerate Tamara Leach for 7 years. He finally spoke up about that last week. He needs to speak up about this outrage now, today, just like he used to always do in the vintage Poilievre days. I encourage you, communicate that message to him. And if you have a Conservative MP, communicate that message. You have a Liberal MP, tell them that their party's bankrupt, that their MPs are crazy, and that they'd better shake their head because Judgment Day is coming for all of us. But I tell you, there's another Judgment Day coming for the Liberal Party of Canada and Mark Carney's government. And that can't come fast enough. Thanks for joining me today. God bless this country. God bless this country, what it can be and used to be. Godspeed to all of you. Continue to resolve to resist. This has been David Krayden broadcasting to you live from Ottawa. I'll be back again tomorrow.